Hey everybody, welcome. Thank you all for coming out. We're going to get started. Hey.
Yehuda had to go to the bathroom. That's where he is right now.
We'll vamp until he's back.
Thanks.
We actually have a couple of announcements, so this is great. As most of you I think know, this event is part of the Ember.js NYC meetup. We do a monthly event, usually down at Pivotal's office. And for this special event, Harvest was kind enough to host, which we're very grateful for. A couple of quick announcements, upcoming events. We'll have a July event that'll be posted on the meetup, our regular event with talks. We also have been running a series of events that we call Hacker Hours, which is a relatively informal, small crowd opportunity to get some help on a project, a problem that might be stumping you, to offer help if you're a more seasoned Emberanial, and it's been very successful. Just raise your hand if you have come to a Hacker Hours and found it useful. Cool. So if you have questions, talk to those folks after. Speaking of after, we're going to follow this up with drinks at a bar nearby called Rogue. So there'll be an opportunity to socialize some more. The next Hacker Hours, though, is going to be this coming Tuesday. Michael Grisati, raise your hand, Mike, is going to host over at Red Rover HQ, not far from here. So that's awesome. We'll put that up on the meetup probably tonight or tomorrow, and you can sign up. It is first come, first served. So when we decided we wanted to do this event, Yehuda and Tom and Leah are in town to do training on Ember that I think some of you who are here attended this week. So we decided to put this together, but we didn't have a space available. And at the Ember meetup that I asked, does anybody host us? TJ said, you should talk to us. We've got a beautiful space. We just moved in here. And I later found out that I think every member of the core team who's sitting up here actually is a Harvest customer, uses Harvest for time tracking, so it works out quite well. And I also hear a rumor that Harvest has an Ember project going internally as well. So I just wanted to give TJ Shook a chance to share a little bit about what Harvest is, where you are.
Hi everyone. Is anyone here already a Harvest user? Cool, you can tune out. Actually, pay attention for the first part. The beer system is a queue, not a stack. Cold ones are in the front, warm ones are in the back. It's really simple, guys. Everyone was messing that up. So Harvest is time tracking, invoicing, and reporting software. It's all web-based, but we also have native apps, Mac app, iPhone app, Android app. Again, all these guys are hopefully happy users. I'm also a happy user prior to working here. We are the only dev team in New York not hiring, so sorry, but we are hiring. We are hiring for other positions, so if you guys are lost and shouldn't be here, or if you know someone else looking for a job, getharvest.com/careers. If you just want to try out Harvest, getharvest.com, sign up for a trial. It's free for 30 days. On top of that, secret just for you guys, if you use the coupon code TOMSTER, you get $10 off your first month. That's really all I have to say, so enjoy the panel.
Awesome, thanks TJ. In addition to providing the space, Harvest is responsible for the pizza, the beer, the portion of the AV equipment that our amazing volunteers, Lee and Alex, were not able to beg or borrow. I don't think there was stealing happening. So thanks again for that generosity. So just basically what's going to go on tonight is we're going to do a kind of panel discussion, a mix of questions from you guys here in the live audience, as well as questions that were submitted via Google Moderator. So looking forward to doing that. We're going to start off with introductions. So if I could just ask, we'll just start with you, Yehuda, and we'll go right across the table. Just a little bit about who you are, where you came from briefly, and what you focus on Ember. You can use these mics, right, Lee?
I will lean forward.
Lean in, bro.
Hey, I'm Yehuda. Before I worked on Ember, I worked on Rails. Before that, I worked on Merb. Before that, I was a web developer working on Cold Fusion or something. And before that, I was a print journalist and print designer. So that's my story. I do a lot of things on Ember. I don't know. I don't have a particular area of expertise.
Except for the whole thing.
I got this one. Hey, Tom. Hey, Tom. I had the idea for Ember in the shower.
Heard that joke before.
Thanks. Primarily, I focus on Rebecca Black and integrating Ember with Hadoop. Thank you.
Kris, Ember is the first large open source project I've contributed to. Before that, I worked for a couple startups, a television network, and before that was a 3D animator.
What?
Is this news to you? Did you work on Shrek?
No commercials. Did the Bonzi Buddy, the first spyware. I'm dead serious.
That's this guy.
Not the code, the animation. I did not. Okay. Anyway, focus on, I don't know, the whole thing, using it, trying to make it feel right. A lot of Ember metal, trying performance and memory because we're using it on mobile. That's it.
I'm Steph. I am the only Canadian on the Ember core team. I work with Chris and Luke at Yap, and Chris forgot to mention that he does performance, but he does a metric. I can't say that word, I guess. He does a lot of performance, and it's actually awesome.
An imperial ton.
Yes, an imperial, yes, massive amount, which makes it possible on mobile and lots of other things. Anyways, so I do all over the place in Ember, lots of the more tedious things that other people don't want to do. Lots of the bugs that are really just scumbag browser author bugs that involve days and days of pain. Anyways, that's me.
That's why we keep him around. Hi, I'm Leah. I'm the token, not really writing all that much code member of the team. I work on building community, building the project, infrastructure, evangelism, silly things like the website sometimes, though I will turn to Steph for anything actually challenging that comes up on that front. I previously worked on the jQuery
Making
project.
Tomsters,
yes. I previously worked on the jQuery project and on Ruby on Rails and projects like the first Ruby Summer of Code. I run developer conferences like the Golden Gate Ruby Conference, the up until now jQuery conferences, Ember Camp, and many more wonderful things to come.
RailsConf.
RailsConf.
Awesome. And we've got, just want to also mention that there's 3 members of the core team who couldn't be here in New York tonight. Peter Wagonet is in Southern California and works with Tom and Yehuda and Leah at Tilda. Trek Lowacki in Chicago, and Eric Brin, who I think is officially from Chicago. Trek focuses on documentation. Peter and Eric range across a wide variety of Ember. Cool. So let's get started with the first question. And I think this is one that is on everybody's mind, but Matthew Beal, who's here tonight. Where is Matthew? Matthew, you're here.
There he is.
There we go. So Matthew asked, what do you see as some of the remaining hurdles in the road to 1.0? And also, what are some things that are specifically excluded from 1.0? Tom, do you want to take the first crack at that?
I'd love to, Luke. Thank you. I think that we could cut a release at any day, thus it being a release candidate. However,
I was going to say, I hear we do release candidates wrong.
yes, I just engaged in a Twitter exchange, as did Yehuda, with a gentleman who took umbrage with our RC nomenclature. But he was very nice. He was a very nice man. Very nice about it.
Very nice, wrong, man.
No, he was right. I just don't know what
Yeah.
we could have done about it.
Yeah.
I don't know. You can't release the RC1 and then be like, whoops, actually, beta 5.
Doesn't work like that. I think we could have released at any day. There are many companies building on top of Ember. We build our product on top of Ember. Yap builds their product on top of Ember. Probably many of you do as well. So I think it's ready. The only thing about 1.0 is this big commitment, isn't it? It's like getting married. I haven't been married, but I assume that's what it's like. That being said, I think we did our training today. We did our training today. We finished our training, and how many of you have seen the new Ember.component component of the framework? Has anyone seen this? Great. So it's basically like a subclass of Ember.view, but way better, because instead of all the scope in your template leaking into it, it's totally isolated. It's great. And actually shares a shocking amount of similarity with web components, which is a spec, a W3C spec that you may be familiar with. So I think there's a couple issues with that we'd like to iron out. Alex Machinier, who is here, has done just a tremendous job on the new async transition stuff.
Someone should buy him a beer or a few tonight. Not too many because we need him to do more work, but.
So he did, in fact, so good at the training, people had questions. We had to invite him to come give an explanation because I didn't know. So I think we'd like to see that shake out, and at that point, I think we're ready to cut it. It's basically say we don't have any plans on making any breaking changes, so at any point, really.
There are a couple of additional points that I would make about 1.0. One of them is that there are definitely documentation gaps, especially around new features like component, that I think need to be filled before I would be comfortable releasing. There's also there's like a documentation sweep for idiomatic stuff, so the Getting Started Guide is not idiomatic anymore. And there's a lot of places in the documentation where it refers to features that, while they will still work because of great practice compatibility, are not necessarily the right way to do it. So I think we need to do a big sweep of everything and make sure everything says the right thing. There's also a couple of things that they are not breaking in the sense that they do not change publicly specified behavior, but there are a couple of changes that I want to make before 1.0 that may break applications that are relying on unspecified behavior. So let me tell you which two things I have in mind, and maybe Kris can speak more to them. One of them is, in general right now, the exact timing of when an observer fires after you make a change to something is undefined. And in fact, there are many ways in the framework for an observer to fire asynchronously instead of synchronously. But many people who are in hack it until it's working mode, and I am often in that mode, but hopefully not often. I'm sometimes in that mode, may have come to rely on the specific timing of when observers fire accidentally. And so it is a goal of ours to make all observers fire asynchronously at some time in the future. And I think we may need to do that before 1.0, just because we want to make sure we don't want to be breaking people's applications after 1.0. And even though it's just, like I said, undefined behavior, there are applications that rely on it. So, and then the second thing is similar. There are many. This is, in my opinion, undefined behavior, but I think our documentation is not as clear about it. In templates, as of probably like more than 3 months ago, if you wanted to refer to a string, you needed to put things in quotation marks. Accidentally, because of implementation reasons, you are often able to leave out your quotation marks. And if you leave out quotation marks, sometimes the thing that you pass in is treated like a string anyway.
And sometimes not.
And sometimes not. However, it is good if every single place where you could type in a string, if you didn't type in a string, it would be an expression that was pulled off of the current context, so that, for example, link to, for example, treats the first parameter as a string. What if you're looping over a bunch of things and you happen to be looping over a bunch of places to link to? Now you are unable to implement that. Or if you're writing a custom view / component and you would like to pass in the place to link to as a parameter, now you cannot implement this because there is no way to refer to a non-literal. So in my opinion, it has always been the case, and it is the case in handlebars, that the behavior of non-string behaving as though they were strings is undefined. However, I know that our documentation has been inconsistent about this, and I don't think it is tenable for us to simply keep the current hodgepodge of random cases where we happen to or not treat something like strings. So I think we're going to have to fix all of the bugs, but I think that also may break some apps where people are typing something as if it was a string literal without quotation marks.
I think Alex was literally working on this an hour ago.
Yeah, I think what we'll probably do for that one, because I think it will be extremely annoying, is have a flag that's like, I know that I did something undefined, but I do not want to have to upgrade my entire app right now. So please, whatever RC6 treated as a string, please do that. And then, but in general, the new behavior will be correct. I consider this a bug that in random cases, a string is a string, or non-string is a string, and in random cases it's an expression. I think it would be hard to document. If we thought we didn't want to break compatibility, documenting it would be extremely hard. So, anyway.
Cool.
Do you have anything?
Not that I can explain in a short. And just
Sounds good.
Is there anything I said about the observer thing that you disagree with?
Maybe the motivations, like there's some performance implications, positive performance implications, that would be net benefit.
So I totally like those things. The reason I want to do async observers is actually, well, there's two. One of them is I just think it is good when things are consistent. And the fact that sometimes it's synchronous and sometimes it's asynchronous is much worse than if it was always asynchronous. But second of all, increasingly the browser features that are observer-like or actual observers are going to be asynchronous, and I would like to be able to use browser features when they come out. So we need to move to a mode, an architectural mode that is similar to the browser features, so that we don't have to implement set and get for the rest of our.
that's the main. I would say is the main motivating. That's the motivating factor too for me around the. How to treat dependency keys and the flushing. Anyway, that's more than I want to.
Yes, I've spent a lot of time with talking to Kris and also the people at Google working on Object.observe, and we would like Ember's observers to be extremely compatible with that feature, and instead of right now where it's sometimes somewhat compatible and sometimes not. That way we can use it.
Cool. Great. Well, I'm very excited about 1.0. So thinking about the last, how long has it been? A year and a half? 2 years? 2 years now. Thinking about that 2-year experience on Ember, what has been the hardest part? What's been like the moment where, was there a moment that anybody here wanted to just like give up?
Yesterday?
Maybe I can answer that. I do not want to dominate things here, but we're discussing this at lunch today. I think probably the most depressing part for me was when we had written a 20,000 line library. 20,000 lines is a lot of lines. And I would see articles on Hacker News that said, Backbone and Ember, same thing. Backbone was 800 lines of code at the time. So I think that was pretty demoralizing, really demoralizing. But I think the good news is that as a group, the collective insanity has ended, and web developers now understand that there are trade-offs and that abstractions can be good and are not something to be feared, which is great. So the fact that we are doing battle now with Angular, I guess, is for me much more rewarding than having to do battle with 800 lines of code.
Cool.
Do you guys have any?
Anybody else want to jump on that one?
I pretty much agree with Tom.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think jumping off that question, there were a bunch of questions that people submitted around, I'm new to the space.
So actually on that point, the transition, so I've been around the Ember thing for a long time, before it was called Ember. Yehuda was like, hey Steph, don't tell anyone, but something is going to happen and you should look at this. So I went and looked at this thing called SproutCore, and the pain all along was like both good and bad. Like I see all the power, but there were many points in time where I was like, I don't know if this is actually worth it. And then you'd see more, you'd be like, actually yes. And then I stopped, did a bunch of Backbone stuff, built some big apps in it, and I was like, yeah, what am I doing? I'm re-implementing the stuff that was confusing and inconsistent. But over time, that's become really good, really powerful. And now more recently, we've added sort of a routing layer on top to kind of tie all these components together, to organize your app, to give you common patterns so you can share work with other developers. And as soon as we hit the point where these common patterns became reusable and you could move between teams and understand what their app was doing, that was a massive like +1 and sort of re-encouragement.
Cool. So interesting question, like thinking about that way back to the SproutCore days. Leah, Tom, and Yehuda made a pretty big bet when you guys were leaving Strobe to strike out on your own, do your own thing, and you know, to make a big bet on this thing that hardly existed at the time. It was SproutCore 2. What was it about the vision and the promise of SproutCore 2 that made you guys think, like, this is a good idea, let's go for it?
I can speak to this a little bit. I feel like they're looking at me. Many things I could say incorrectly. As you may or may not know, Strobe was purchased by Facebook. So our other option was to attempt to work at Facebook. I think Tom and Leah and I had no interest in working for Facebook. And so I think we had a few options. One of them was to go work for another VC-backed company in Silicon Valley. And the other one was to start our own company. And I think at that point, we had been at a number of VC-backed companies. And what we had learned was that while VCs could talk a good game for a little bit, they often did not seem to really understand the point of open source or what open source brought to the table or how to use open source as a useful tool for a business. And I was kind of tired of this. Personally, I really care a lot about open source, so Facebook did not seem that interested in having people that would be working on open source. So that obviously was an option for me. And like I said, I was pretty tired of going to work at companies, building a team. So I obviously spent a lot of time building teams, and then you run out of money, and all of a sudden the team is now scattered to the 10 corners of the earth? Four corners of the earth.
Four.
Yes.
Yehuda lives somewhere else sometimes.
There's some history that is worth mentioning, which is that probably a year before the end of Strobe, which means when it was born, since it was really only around for, I don't know, a year and a half, something like that. But before we joined Strobe, Yehuda, myself, and Carl, who's the fourth co-founder of Tilda with Tom, had at the time been having the same conversation we ultimately had a year later, where we were like, okay, we really want to strike out on our own. We've watched a bunch of people make the same mistakes over and over again, and we think we can do it a little differently. We want to avoid some of those pitfalls, and we really want to get back to where early engineering had been for a while also, which was like heavily supporting open source, really thinking that it was not just a good thing to do, but also core to the business being successful and actually making money. And at that point, the only reason we sort of didn't end up pursuing starting Tilda at that time, and that was actually when we came up with the name of the company, was because Yehuda met this guy named Charles, and they started talking about his project SproutCore, and Yehuda thought, like, this has a lot of the big ideas that I really think are the way of the future. And ultimately, it turned out that it didn't quite, it wasn't the long game, I guess, but it was the root of what ultimately became Ember, and similarly for our company, it was the root of the ideas that ultimately took us where we are today. It was worth the year because obviously in that year we met Tom and we all lived happily ever after.
What would Ember be without a Tomster?
Right?
Actually, what would Ember be without the shower?
So specifically the thing that Charles said at the time, pretty much all I knew that I cared about was that I wanted data-bound templates to exist as a thing. So back then, I think Flex was the thing that you used if you wanted data-bound templates, and I wanted something different. But I was looking around, and Charles had written a blog post around that same time where he basically said you don't want to be having companies that are like EXTJS, or at the time Cappuccino was relying on Atlas to make money. You don't want to have companies that are relying on people buying parts of their open source project in order to succeed. You want to have companies that are essentially enabling a new generation of open source. So when we started Strobe with Charles, at the time, it's easy to forget, but there was basically nobody doing big open source application development stuff other than SproutCore that was just free. So there was what would become Sencha, which has a corporate license, and there was Cappuccino, which had the paid-for Atlas, and a bunch of other widget frameworks. But Charles was the only person that had passionately spoken about not trying to make money, trying to align your interests with users and not trying to make a ton of money off of it. And obviously, we need to make money to run business, and probably Tom could speak about this. But I think the ability, realizing that open source at the end of the day is not necessarily using it as a parasite, trying to extract money out of it is not, even if all you care about is money, that is not even the most effective way to get money from an open source project. So.
Well, I think both Yehuda and I, and presumably the rest of the core team, although I haven't spoken with them at length about this, believe And I don't know, your time here on Earth is limited, isn't it? And
Where is this going?
Someone get him another beer.
I don't know, I just feel like there's more than raking in the cash. Although I like that, it would be nice, but I believe in the web. Like, I think that the web is a triumph of humanity, and what little drop in the bucket I can do to make that a threat to things like native environments like Cocoa, Android. If you can write for the web instead of having to write to a proprietary framework, I think that's freaking cool, man. And So for me, the web winning is like the thing that gets me up in the morning and drives me. And I know that Yehuda is the same because we've had a lot of conversations about this. So, and I've looked at open source projects, and the ones that tend to win are ones where the people who are running it believe in what they're doing and aren't in it for the bucks, and two, where there's a constellation of companies working on it, right? You have many people invested. I don't want to work on an open source project where it's hitched to one company. I did that at Apple on SproutCore, and it was miserable. I like Ember, I like Postgres, I like companies where if any one of us got hit by a bus tomorrow, it would be fine. Discourse, there you go. Well, Discourse is one company I suppose.
So honestly, for me, probably the thing that has on this topic that has most spoken to me is around the time that MySQL was getting bought by Sun. There was a blog post that I occasionally locate, but I can't easily find it, which was by Enterprise DB people, which are a company that happens to involve in Postgres. And obviously, MySQL is GPL, and so there's this idea that some people who are very strong advocates of GPL have that's like, GPL means open, it means that you can't take it away from us. But of course, the argument that the Enterprise DB people made and that the Postgres people made at the time was actually the thing that means you can't take it away from us is it's not actually owned by one company. And I think for me, that was really, that helped me realize, and I wrote a blog post soon thereafter, which I think I called something pretentious like the maximal use doctrine for open source. But for me, it's important that you use licenses and strategies and business ideas that maximize usage, because having people file bugs and contribute and do little things like add asserts or fix warnings, I think that ends up meaning that there's a lot more people invested in the thing that you're doing. Also, DHH wrote a blog post that was called Why There Is No Rails Inc., which also was formative for me. You don't really want to have a company that is the company about framework. You don't want to have, honestly, Tengen existing is not, I think, optimal for Mongo. I think what's better is to have many companies that are all working on a particular project, such that if any one of them becomes evil, it's no problem, they'll just get pushed off and everyone else will continue.
Also, we're working on hard problems. There's often where any one person who's incredibly intelligent has a fantastic idea and it's brought to the table, and you realize that the more smart people you can have a room together that work well, the better team you have, the better solutions you get out of it. So someone comes to the table and says, this is awesome, and someone's like, you know, that is pretty good, but think about it like this, and all of a sudden you have this other idea. We have this all the time at work, we have this all the time in the core team, we have this with our community. Even like on the weekends, I often have like sort of Ember hack fests with people that are crazy like me and do it for fun all the time, and like we often have this. Someone has an idea, other person has an idea, you unite this idea, the more people that can kind of think about this, all of a sudden it turns into this fantastic thing that other people can utilize.
Otherwise you end up with stuff like TurboLinks. Now, you need to have enough companies working on something as peers such that if someone comes up with a bad idea, other people can succeed at getting it to not become part of the framework.
It is scary. It is scary because it does mean that like Yehuda and Tom, probably the early two like leads, right? They gave up a lot of control and power when they built a core team. And Yehuda maintains, and I agree that it's the right thing to do, but it does mean that like occasionally there are really frustrating moments where we're like, some guy had a really stupid idea and like we can't just shut it down. Like, what do? We have to build momentum and we have to advocate and talk to people. And part of me is just like, well, it's your project. Like, no. But it doesn't, yeah. We've chosen a different path, which most days is the right path.
We are in it together.
Yeah.
And everyone has different needs, and it turns out that this balance is actually powerful. As long as you can work together well as a team, which we can. We actually like hang out
Most
as
days.
friends most of the time, but there's a huge amount of power in this. And if it's not bound to a specific company, you have like a bunch of different companies all pooling these resources together, and that is awesome.
Cool. So on the topic of community, we've been very fortunate to grow an awesome community here in New York. I look out here and I see a ton of faces that I now consider friends. Seen over the last year. For people who are watching this outside of New York, or for those of you who are here from out of town, if you want to start a community locally, how do you go about it? How do you get started? Are there any resources to support that from the core?
So it's not very hard is the first thing I would say. I think it's one of those problems where people don't really know where to start. But once we hand them the list of like, do these 3 things, they're like, oh, I can do that, it's no big deal. So we try to do that. So we have like a contact form on the Ember page, and it's just like, get in touch if you need help. And we do get lots of emails, and the results of those emails are the 15, 20 Ember user groups that there are. Not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them. And it's just, I don't know, I mean, I don't want to get into the details because it won't really interest people, right? But it's like you have to find a venue, and you have to find maybe sponsors and figure out where and when and how many people are interested. As a core team, we try to help them in whatever small ways we can, which the most important thing I think we offer is just emotional support. Just like, you can do this is fun, you're gonna like this. It's sometimes helping them convince their companies that there's value there, and that it's worth investing $100 in pizza in, or even just the space, or even just letting them do a little bit of something to make it happen. And then there's like, we try to send them stickers, and we try to help them like figure out how to approach sponsors and how to pitch things to them. And like, we use Meetup, and I think you use it also, right? But it's not necessarily the obvious choice. And there are a lot of groups that start with like, oh, I have to make a website and build a system and this and that, and we're just like,
they get lost in the details.
These are the answers to the easy questions that you need to get out of the way, and then you're off and running. And then you can sort of figure out your style for your town or group, or what works the best for you.
I think also when people start new user groups, a thing that we try to do but cannot always do is if somebody from the team is nearby or happens to be nearby, we'll often coordinate with them. So there's been at least a few meetups where we coordinated their launch event to one of us happen to be in town for a training or a conference or something like that. So obviously we can't always do that, and there's costs involved in all this. But I think to the extent that we can help draw attention to the meetup that you're building, that's something that we love to do.
I would say that there's definitely more that we'd like to do. I did a lot of this at Engineer, helping Ruby on Rails meetup groups get started, which now they don't need any help at all. But back then they did. And at the time, Engineer was a little bigger, and Engineer had a bit more money. And it was the same thing with Strobe at certain stages, where we were able to do things like, oh, we will pay the $72 for your 6 months of meetup fees to get started, and we'll pay for your first month's pizza. And or like one of the times we had like a GoToMeeting subscription, right? So we would at least give them that tool and say, we will help you do a video chat with one of the core team members. There are little things like that, and as the money appears, we'll hopefully be able to do things like that for Ember groups as well.
That money.
I would suggest, coming from organizing the Seattle meetup, that unless you can get a sponsor that's going to recurringly sponsor food, that you not
You mean you don't want to set the precedent that people get food every time?
It's been hard because we get a lot more sponsors that sponsor space, and our favorite space, they're like, well, we're already giving you the space, why do we pay for food? But then when we go approach another sponsor, they're like, well, if we're going to pay for food, you need to use our space.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, some of that is just in how you approach it, right? Like we generally, oh, you want to sponsor? What you do is you sponsor the space and you sponsor the food. They go together. So you have to like, don't plant the idea that they're separate elements.
It sounds like Kris is getting mega trolled.
Yeah. Another factor is consistency.
Yeah.
Pick a night of the month.
Yeah.
And sometimes the venue might have to be a little bit flexible. But aim for something that's consistent, that's in a somewhat central location where public transport is readily available at a time that makes sense. And this consistency is good, even if it's like, so I came from a really different place than New York City, and it was like me and my best friend that started hanging out at a coffee shop every Thursday, which turned into 4 or 5, to turn into like the coffee shop owners being excited that there are this many people to asking us to politely find somewhere else because, this consistency, some staples that continue to come and continue to have interesting ideas. We started this with a simple hackfest type thing, and once we had enough people, it just turned into a meetup style event. And if you only have 3 or 4 people, this is actually awesome because you can really iterate and really have some fun, and then it grows and it changes over time.
Cool, great stuff. So after this question, we're gonna take a couple of questions from the audience. So get yours ready. This is the one that came up a few times in the Google moderator, which is dealing with SEO, site crawlability. What do you guys imagine in the future for Ember of how do we tackle that with an Ember style app?
I just want to start by saying this is their favorite topic of all of the possible topics.
So, the first thing that I would say is that Discourse, which is a large Ember application that is largely a content-driven site, has perfectly fine SEO, and if you browse it with JavaScript off, it works. Now, how does this work? You might imagine that they do something very crazy. No. What they did was, one afternoon, they said, we are just going to make a bunch of really boring Rails templates that take the content that we would otherwise send to JSON, and we're going to put them in ERB and send them to the browser. They put it in a NoScript tag, which is what Google tells you to do. Now you might imagine, well, that sounds like I'm doing double the work. No. Discourse has taken them over a year to build, and the SEO part took them less than 1 day. So clearly it is not this, you imagine that it's double the work, but actually you don't care what the SEO part looks like. You only care that it contains the content and links to other content, and that Google accepts it. So what I would say is, even though this sounds like, to me it is a very unsatisfying answer, I don't like to say it, but as a matter of fact, if all you're trying to do is dump content onto a screen, you can actually get away with doing this really dumb hack. And NoScript, in fact, is a very nice, Google believes that you are not trying to screw them when you use a NoScript tag containing the content, because if people come with JavaScript turned off or with JavaScript latency, they're going to see the content, so it's unlikely to be something completely different. So that's what I think is the most clear answer for SEO. There's the possibility that we will try to do something more automagic. However, the infrastructure required to do something more automagic, such as having node servers running Ember on the server, actually seems worse than the thing I just described, and more error prone, and probably will cost you more time over the lifetime of your application than doing this really simple hack. So I would, I think, recommend that until Google gets their act together and starts just running JavaScript, which to some degree they're starting, don't freak out. Go write an ERB template or some template in Node if that's your thing, or Django or whatever, and call it a day. You're done.
Cool.
On the templating stuff, I have done a few small hacks to get Ember views rendering on the server. The thing that you get in trouble with is like when you start doing stuff on did insert element or integrating a jQuery plugin, those become increasingly difficult to support. And at that point, you would be better just dumping your data.
Also, Googlebot doesn't care about all of those things.
Yeah.
Yes.
It actually, like, simple, clear, concise content is much more indexable than, ooh, what is this?
And if you're running your Rails app, your Ember app in the server or your backbone app or whatever, you also have to make sure that the data, your JSON data that you're giving it, is exactly the same as the JSON data you would give in the client, which is just another thing to have to figure out. I would not have said confidently that it would not be a very hard problem. However, having looked at what the Discourse people did, it is now obvious to me, super obvious, that this is not actually hard, and that people are massively over-engineering the SEO solution because they're unsatisfied with what appears to be a hack. And I would just say, stop being so worried about it. Just do that. It's fine.
Great, thanks. Who's got a question out there? Raise your hand, and let's go to bring one right behind you, Alex, to Ross.
Hi, I'm Ross. Hi, guys. So earlier we had a question about sort of the road to 1.0 on Ember. I'm curious if you could speak to the same sort of concerns for Ember data, or maybe at least to a production readiness. What were sort of the big hurdles that we need to overcome?
I took the last bullet down. This is all yours.
Hey, Ross. So Ember data, while being a much more tightly scoped problem than something like Ember, is, I would say, roughly 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more challenging. So I personally cannot speak to when it will be close to production ready, other than I think we know that we have certain challenges that we need to overcome first. And I personally, what am I supposed to say in this situation? We rehearsed this.
I think I'm gonna end up going off script.
So we're continuing to work on it. I think it's an important problem. I think it's, are we allowed to swear? Sure. I think it's horseshit that people have to write
That was
custom.
worth asking for permission for.
I think it's horseshit that people have to write custom Ajax code. That being said, I know that people have been frustrated with Ember data, and I think for good reason. I think we scoped it too wide at the beginning. I think if we had focused on a more narrow set of problems, it probably would have behooved us, perhaps. That being said, I've been very excited by the recent proliferation of data persistence libraries in Ember, and I think for us, we are focused on getting Ember 1.0 out the door. We think it's a marvelous solution for application architecture in the web browser, and we're really excited to see. I don't think we want to tightly couple Ember to Ember data at all. There's actually, so I think this is a thing that not a lot of people know, but the API, the surface area between Ember and Ember data is actually quite small. And other libraries like Ember Model are taking advantage of that. And what I'm hoping is that in some of the innovations coming out of these other libraries, that we have something that's a little bit more practical for people to use right now, while we continue toiling away at Ember data, to the point where I think, Active Record, I think, suffered from some of the same complaints in the early days. And I think that's fine. Hopefully people realize by now I'm willing to work on hard problems for a long time while everyone thinks I'm an idiot until I get it right. So I'm going to continue to toil away at that, but I just want to make sure that people don't not use Ember, because Ember data is still under development.
Yeah, I agree with basically everything Tom just said. One thing that I think is worth thinking about from a thought experiment perspective. So a lot of people, I think the biggest source of problems is not that Ember data exists in principle, but that a lot of our documentation seems to assume that Ember data is used. And often people say, you should just replace Ember data with a simple call to $.ajax or get.json. Why don't you just do that in the documentation, and then people will not think that it's coupled to Ember data. Seems reasonable. And I think to me, the main problem with that is that, in fact, if you look at what people like Discourse are doing, or what simple solutions like Ember Model are doing, what you will find is that there is not a trivial amount of code involved. So we could not say to you, so I think the most obvious example is almost every single model framework for Ember includes an identity map. Specifically what that means is that if you have a copy of article number 1 on the client, and you will try to get article number 1 again through the public API of your model framework, you do not want to get a completely different copy of article number 1, because then when you edit copy number 1, copy number 2 will not update on the screen. So you must have some kind of caching layer, which means otherwise what will happen is people will build using the examples provided by the Getting Started guide, and then every single Ember app you ever go to, you will click on something, you will click the back button, and you will see a loading spinner again. This does not seem like a good experience to me. So I don't feel confident telling people to do something that I don't think any real application actually does, which is to just use $.ajax. And I also do not feel confident in the Getting Started guide to teach people how to build a model framework, or even a very simple one. I do not feel confident saying, before you get started, let's build an identity map. So there must be something in the Getting Started guide that encapsulates these concerns. Now, in theory, we could go with any of the other model frameworks. However, I am happy to be proven wrong, but I suspect that the people who are working on these other model frameworks would actually not appreciate being the default option in the Getting Started guide, because all of a sudden now they would be the recipients of many complaints from people who do not think that the solution is well solved. So I think there's just a bit of a problem here, which is that you need something. There are actually many good solutions. I think in general one of the lessons I learned working in open source is that people are much more forgiving of choices that they have made on their own than choices that they feel are foisted upon them. So many people, or a number of people, still use isolate in Rails instead of bundler and think that they have made an optimal choice. If you're a Ruby person, you should laugh at this. And that's because they made the choice and they're willing to put up with a lot of extra work because they made the choice. And I think that's at the core of the problem. I think we could definitely, it would be fine probably to say, okay, we're going to remove Ember data and put Ember model in there. Again, I am unsure that Eric would appreciate this. I think he might think that he would appreciate it and then not. But what I do not want to do is just do a really simple thing that in practice would make Ember apps that people build it according to that cookbook feel slow and as though they were just using a server-side framework. I think if you constantly getting spinners when you're using an Ember app, probably something is not right. But I think that would happen if there was no identity map. So hopefully that has helped to explain. That is essentially my brain dump of my thinking on the topic. I don't really know how to deal with it because all the options are bad. The only one that seems to be most plausible is keep trying to make Ember data better until people stop asking for us to remove it from the documentation. But
So
that seems bad also.
It's worth explicitly calling out that probably one of the major things in the way of Ember data getting finished is how crappy people feel about Ember data. I don't know, people in open source get very entitled very easily, and when they try this free, awesome thing that you've worked on and it's not immediately what they want, they get really angry, and suddenly there's like some guy on Twitter and he's like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, blah, blah,
Hacker
blah.
news effect.
Yes, and I mean, but it's not a joke, because like these are projects that these guys are, for the most part, working on after 8 hours at a day job when they come home and they're really excited. And it's hard to get excited for that. And sometimes there's like productive time that goes down the drain because the guys come home and they're like, I can't even think about this for 3 days. I feel so awful about that like horrible blog post that somebody wrote, or the tweet, or this or that.
We get a lot of anonymous letters to the Ember core team.
Yes. So, I mean, this is,
Apparently we don't build apps.
yeah. I don't know what the answer to the problem is, but I would certainly say that thank you, Russ, for not including any expletives in your question. But
I think we...
I should say, Leah is correct. I should say something that I feel like we keep not saying, because we get super on the defense when we bring up this topic. I think Ember data will eventually be really cool. I think Ember data will eventually be the active record of what we're doing. I think it is as hard as it is harder than active record, because it's like active record plus async plus a completely random server that you have.
Plus long-lived.
But I think that it is important for frameworks like Ember to have a thing like Ember data. And I am totally open to proposals that people have about Ember data to make it more short-term palatable. I think we've tried a few things that have not been so successful, but totally reasonable to do any sorts of short-term palliative measures to make Ember data more useful in the short term. But completely abandoning Ember data and saying, oh, everyone should just go write $.get.json feels to me like we're abandoning our mission as a web framework. So I don't think that's going to happen. But I agree with Leah that I wish that people could, even if you can't use it right now and you end up using what Discourse is using or Ember model, I wish people could in general just feel willing to help and be excited and believe in it.
There's definitely, I think every developer can relate to the fact that sustainable pace and your level of happiness are very coupled, and so when people troll as a way of like
advocating
they think
for whatever they want.
motivating.
Trolling is not a motivational technique.
The answer is not to say bad things, by the way. I mean, the answer is not to not tell us what is wrong, because we want to hear about it.
We are very well aware of... So TLDR, we agree persistence is something that needs to be solved, and it will be solved.
That being said, there are a lot of apps. The one thing you really need, hopefully you don't disagree with me, but when you think of the identity map as a cache, and if you have an app that has read-only data, there are plenty of apps like that.
Yep.
That Ajax plus caching for read-only data, I would still probably, on a listing endpoint, even if I was, anytime you have a client-side framework that's going to support CRUD, your identity map, so active record, its lifespan is just serving one request.
And they can't even get an identity map to work. So.
Yes, because when you have identity map, you have to deal with syncing, and syncing is non-trivial.
Yep.
And then you add on a long-lived app. But if you're doing like a massive listing, right? You're not doing CRUD on a massive listing. It's probably likely, even if I was using the best client-side model framework, that there are endpoints where it would still just
I totally agree. I think whenever you're getting in a client-side framework to do anything with a huge list, I think you're probably not going to. I think pound each is going to stop being very useful. I think Ember data record arrays are going to stop being very useful. I think you're going to end up wanting to do more local stuff.
And Ember, I think, allows for that.
Absolutely.
I mean, views are flexible. You can write your own render. You don't have to use the templates. It's just nice that for 90% of your app, you can do things very trivially and simply. And then that one hard endpoint, you can...
The one thing I would say about the read-only data case is I think most people underestimate the extent by which they have non-trivial relationships between the read-only entities. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't necessarily make the problem that much harder if you don't have mutability, but there are a lot of cases that you want to handle that you have to think about. So you want to make sure that you have a one-to-many relationship, both sides are linked up, so that somebody 6 months from now coming to your app doesn't accidentally, if the post has many comments, and they try to access the post from the comment, you don't want it to suddenly not work and they have to go figure out how to wire it up, right? And people then start to want many-to-many relationships because tagging is a pretty popular thing. You have many-to-many relationships, of course you don't have all the tags locally. How do you deal with that? So I think there are real problems that occur even in read-only cases that people underestimate when they start out with a simple get.json case. And pretty much everybody who's not working on a competing model framework who I talk to, like people like Discourse, who are just using their own simple $get.json wrappers or libraries in their stuff, tell me that they really wish they want to switch to something else. They don't want to be maintaining it. And I think that in general, app code should not be maintaining stuff. It's not pleasant. But obviously, as Tom said, it's a hard problem, and we need to figure out how to get through this.
Cool. Let's take another question from the audience. Matt.
Well, maybe that's a follow-on.
Let's bring it over. I
I
don't want to beat data to death. I like it. I like the idea. My whole question is, what can we as the community do to help? Because a lot of it is, fuck you, make it better, which sucks. I get that. But what is there anything that we can do to make it better? I don't know what that means, but does that make sense? Me asking that question?
That's a good question.
Yehuda alluded to it a little bit, but
I will start, and then other people can say probably smarter things. I think the biggest blocking point about making Ember data more palliative and better in the short term. So the long term, I think we just have some stuff to work through. We have some hard problems we have to get through. I think in the short term, what I really want to know, and every time I think about this, I find insights, is just what are the things that when people use Ember data for simple cases. So I don't mean they're trying to have a many-to-many mutable relationship and something like this that they would never even come close to writing with a simple $.json. They're trying to do a simple thing, what appears to be a simple thing, and it does not work correctly in Ember data. I think there are ways that we can make that situation better with not that much time, but I don't actually know what that list is. I think Kris believes, and I agree, one of the things is when you save a record and you get something back, sometimes you get it back during the window when you're saving it, or you want to allow people to keep editing. And there's basically in Ember data, there's a lock. When you save a record, there's a lock. You can't do anything to it until you get the results back. And there are various reasons why people would rather just have a last right-win strategy. That is an example. Sorry, that is an illustrative example. I want to find cases like this where people are trying to do something that they think is simple and they're getting stymied by constraints that Ember data is putting in to try to handle more complicated cases, such that we can help you or provide mechanisms for getting around these constraints if you know that you're willing to opt out of the benefits. but I don't have a good list of what these things are. And every time I think about working on Ember data, obviously it's, any one of these features could take 2 or 3 full days. I have very few such time frames, so I need to know what things would be very beneficial in the short term. So if you have used Ember data to do simple things and have hit bugs, especially you have read-only data, or if you have very simple CRUD, read, save cases, and you've hit problems that have made you want to give up, these are things that I think would be extremely beneficial to know about. I don't know if that made sense, but...
Yeah, that's definitely actionable.
Anything
to add?
Just in general, to not just Ember data, but even Ember, if you hit something that seems like a hard problem, something that's even better than a JS bin or a JS fiddle is to actually submit a poll that has a failing test. And people have submitted polls before that they have a solution, but it has a failing test where I didn't really like the solution, but I've still pulled the test, committed it, and got the test passing. I don't like writing tests. So I'm much more likely to do something to fix an issue if it's submitted with a...
I think maybe a better way of than saying that, I would say I don't like writing tests, but I think a better thing to say than that is, often when you are fixing an Ember bug or any framework bug, writing the test takes more time than fixing the issue. Often I look at a bug and I say, okay, I know the problem here, I can fix that bug in like 10 minutes. And then I try to figure out how to write a test for it, and it might take me hours. And this is a real thing, and probably if you have identified a bug, not probably, there are many cases where you have identified a bug, you don't really know how to fix it, but you can write a test. Now, admittedly, writing tests is also a somewhat advanced topic, which is why it may take an hour for me to write one. But I think there are a larger number of people that can write tests. So don't think, I agree with Kris, I think it's easy to think, oh, writing failing tests, what's the point of that? If there were the same number of issues, but 10 times as many of them had tests, I think that would rapidly result in many closed issues.
Tests are also very actionable.
Yes.
They're very actionable, and sometimes they will expose a problem that is actually a core, more deeply rooted. Actually, almost always. There's very rarely that there's a bug that has a PR that is straightforward. Usually you step into one of these things, and then a week later you pop back out with 20 commits and a bunch of things fixed. That's something to take into account. When you submit a PR, it might not just be that if statement that checks that case where the thing is null. It might be a deeply rooted problem, and if we just pull in all the if statements, it becomes a bigger mess.
I've definitely seen cases. Sorry.
Sorry, I would just, because that one is one that is a big issue with the, Most of the time when I see something that's like undefined, find whatever error, and then somebody submits a test, and then they add an if condition around that, that's almost always the symptom and not the root cause. And that's when I'll pull the test in, and I'm grateful to have the test, and then go and delete the if, get the thing failing, and try and fix what the underlying...
So there's a lot of issues that are open that have been looked at that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna look at this one, and I feel kind of bad because I have no good answer for this PR, and I know that this little thing is just going to turn into 12 other little things, and there's going to be much more anger and many more issues because of it. So sometimes something that appears super simple is actually like Pandora's box. You open it up, and all of a sudden, like a month of your life is gone.
Let me say a pet peeve about open source issue trackers. When I first started doing Rails in the beginning, I had no idea what an encoding was. And I noticed that a lot of people were complaining because Ruby 1.9 came out and it introduced the concept of an encoding error. And I did not know what this was, but I noticed a lot of people were reporting it. And one of the biggest encoding errors, but pull requests, and this was on Lighthouse, it wasn't a pull request, patch. One of the biggest ones was simply a thing that implemented a force encoding, which basically says, it turns out what it says is, I promise you, Ruby, this is UTF-8. So then Ruby says, oh, awesome, it's UTF-8, great. Now I'm not going to yell when you try to combine it with another UTF-8 string. Very awesome. Now it turns out that in many, many cases it in fact was UTF-8 because people were getting out of UTF-8 databases. But so many people were like, +1, this solves my issue, awesome. However, in practice, this was not the correct solution because some other people do not have UTF-8 databases and they will not have this, they will start getting garbled data. And I think it is actually relatively common for people to submit pull requests and then to have large numbers of people +1ing, probably, as a general rule, competently maintained projects that have pull requests that have many +1s, this solves my issue, probably the people have looked at it, looked at the solution and have said, this is not quite right. So if you feel like adding a +1 to a long strain of +1s, specifically to say this patch will fix my issue, you might want to investigate why it has not yet been accepted. And maybe you may find success in helping. But I think in general, people are very willing to assume that people are just ignoring something. But in fact, I would say probably all of us have looked at the vast majority of pull requests in some form or another. And in none of the cases where they are open have people looked at it and said, this seems fine, and then just not click the merge button.
Oh, if there's something that is, it's merged.
Cool, thanks. So Alex D, you had a question that you had submitted about build tools, workflow tools. You want to ask that one?
It's gone with tonight.
Yeah, sure. So there are a lot of options for managing your assets and managing your application and building the build process. And it took me, I know, a long time to figure out how to use Yeoman and get that playing well. So I can have my live reload and everything happening nicely. Can you guys speak to some of the different options or what you use? I know it depends a lot on kind of the server side aspect of things, what you're working with, but maybe just try to give everybody a push in that direction.
So I will speak briefly, probably not briefly. I will speak for a bit, and then I think that Kris and Steph have things to say on the topic that I will try to tee up for them. Okay, so the problem with JavaScript build tools today is that the JavaScript ecosystem is pretty immature when it comes to build tools, and there are large elements of the JavaScript community that don't really believe in robust build tools in general. So there are many people that think that you are doing it wrong if you have a build tools toolchain in the first place. I think increasingly that is going away, but at the time that Ember came out, the Node was not yet super popular, and having build tools meant choosing another server-side language. I think often we would have chosen Ruby. That would have made people angry that we had a Ruby dependency. And so historically there has been a number of issues involved in just any JavaScript framework. Dojo used like Rhino, and even that was a hard sell. So I think for a long time the JavaScript ecosystem has not been good at being willing to accept a build tool as a prerequisite or as a part of the happy path. I think that's changing. I think that's awesome. Part of the nice thing about the maturing of the JavaScript community over the past few years is that the JavaScript community has adopted a desire to have some sort of module system. Now, today, there are several competing ones. I think the most popular ones are using NPM modules with Browserify and using AMD. These are competing, non-composable module systems. You cannot use modules together. The good news is that the next version of JavaScript comes with a canonical module system called ES6 modules that I think will finally say what the answer is. In the meantime, Square and I have collaborated on a project called ES6 Module Transpiler.
And Thomas.
And other people who are awesome. Yes, yo, Thomas. Which basically lets you write in the style of the next version of JavaScript, and it will dump out either an AMD module or a Node module for you. So basically, you can write in whatever in the style of the next version of JavaScript and get out whatever your team has decided the loader that they are going to use. I think this is good. So I think that all that coming together, the module system has only really kind of finalized, or finalized is the wrong word, has come together over the past few months. I've been working really hard on the JavaScript committee on that stuff. And so I think we're finally at a point, and this is shortly I'm going to tee it over to Steph and Kris. We're finally at a point where I think we can build a toolchain around ES6 modules. And I think that is going to be the path forward. So Kris and Steph have been working on, they have an app that they've been working on in which they are using an ES6 module-based toolchain, which is very exciting to me, and I think they're interested in working with Ryan Florence on Ember tools to integrate that. and I want them to talk about the details.
So we don't want, no one wants to start a JavaScript project and then spend a week getting their build stuff set up. And I say a week like it doesn't take a week, Steph, but, well, it turns out you want it to be simple, and then your app grows, you add a bunch of import statements, you're like, bro, this doesn't work. I have 600 files. So we have, how big is our editor? We have like 600, 700 files? It's big. You don't want 700 import statements. This seems trivial, but it's actually something you need to sort out. Then you want to run your tests on Travis CI, you want headless tests, browser tests, because it turns out debugging in Phantom is not what you want to do, until you have to, and then it's still not what you want to do. And then you work with a team, you want to do something that the rest of your team can understand and works well. So our goal is to basically work with the ES6 module stuff, experiment, see what feels right, so that we can come up with a solution that might not be good for everyone, but it solves these basic problems that you really shouldn't have to solve when you're starting an app. So we're working on a project called Glacier. I have a few other Spike projects, and we're using a grunt-based build system using ES6 transpiler to output AMD.
So I think, just to be clear, I think it's, many people think that grunt-based build tools is the end of the story. It's like saying I'm using a rake-based build tool. It doesn't really say anything other than the fact that Node is in the mix somewhere. And
yeah.
So they're doing much more cool things than having a grunt file in their root of their project.
Yeah.
And it's still a work in progress. We still have pain issues that are similar to everything else.
There's always trade-offs.
Right.
There's a huge amount of trade-offs, and we're learning a lot of these trade-offs as we're going forward and trying to find the right people, author of Grunt, someone like Thomas to help with the ES6 stuff, to just bring it up to speed. So we're finding a bunch of pain points. Anyway, so the long and the short of it is, it turns out Ember has a resolver when it's looking up stuff. We can hook this resolver. We have in this project, we've hooked up the resolver to work with the output of the ES6 module system. So you have something like a const missing-based solution from Ruby, where basically you don't have to write import statements. It's all pulled based off common patterns into your app. So ultimately, our goal is to provide a solution that means you do not have to waste a week of your time. So that the community instead can continue to improve this. We're at basically this stage right now where we're experimenting in a few different directions, finding the pain points and trying to solve them so we can present a sane solution. If someone wants to see an example of this, talk to me afterwards. I can link you to a project that has a fairly good working example.
It's really nice with the naming conventions and new router to quickly refactor, we need an event, some DOM stuff here, I needed a view behind this template, and you add the file, and because it's named right, the route is going to go look for it, go to the resolver, going to import it. We don't have to do any import thing, we just put the file there. Sometimes I forget the export. But it's actually quite nice to use. Just very, yeah, it just feels very pleasant to add the.
Sorry, I just want to clarify one thing, because Steph said a couple of things that were mildly jargony if you are not already familiar with.
My apologies.
No, I think I agree with what Stefan said. So when when Ember wants to find a controller, so let's say right now if you have a template called my template, and currently Ember will automatically find the controller for that template, and it will be called my template controller, app.mytemplate controller. A while ago, I discovered that while the app.foo controller thing works well for the existing workflow, once we get to modules, that's going to be a problem, because obviously it's going to be completely different naming, as they have discovered when they have done this. And so one of the things that Kris advised me to do many months ago that I did, and I'm very happy that I did, was to move all the logic that looks up controllers, instead of being hard-coded with string, app dot, and then you put the strings together and allocate them, was to push all that logic through an object called the resolver, and that object is a thing that says, oh, you want a controller named foo? Okay, I will look it up on app.foo controller. Great. But then what they have done is they have said, oh, we want to use modules. So when you want a controller named foo, you will look it up in a module called controllers/foo controller, or controller/foo.js. What this basically means is that the vast majority of Ember doesn't actually care how it gets the code. There's a way that we know works reliably for everyone today. We have encouraged people to do this, but Ember is structured so that we can do something completely different when modules were kind of thing. I'm happy that we've done this and that we got it in well before 1.0 and didn't try to cram it in once modules became a thing.
Yeah, awesome. Let's take a question from this side of the room. Who's got one in the back?
It's you.
Oh, shit.
Howdy, gents.
You have a beard.
He has a paper.
Oh, God.
You're limited to one paragraph.
Yeah. So we've been using Ember for a year and a half, and when we started, there was many swear words per minute, but it's dropped a lot down. And just thanks for all the work. It's amazing to use these days.
And now.
Flutter you up. So I'm just trying to get a bit of clarification around the difference between a hook and method overriding in Ember. Is there a difference? Conceptually, they seem very similar. And do you ever see the ability for us to remove having to make calls to this.super?
You can cover that. You have not talked in a while. Do you want me to take it?
Yeah, you should take this.
So, yeah. So a hook is a name that we give to a method that happens to be a thing that the framework calls into. So there are things like this in Rails. I think Rails often will call them callbacks, but callback is a pretty overloaded term in JavaScript since the term callback is used for async stuff. So we cannot call them that. So, and I don't think we've made a conscious decision to use the term hook, but I think we all use it. So hook basically means a method that's like the model hook. It's a method that's on your route, but basically doesn't do anything and you never call it. It only exists as a thing that the framework will call, and you will give it back some information that it will then use to move on its merry way. So that's when we use the term hook. It is a method, but it has a special purpose. Super. So super is a tough problem because the only case that I know for sure you could get rid of super, in theory, is initialization. So I've had a lot of discussions about JavaScript, new extensions of JavaScript, and I think everyone thinks that it would be possible to auto super inside of initialization and not really cause any problems, because in what cases are you not calling super inside of initialization? All initialization does is set up variables. It seems crazy to not call super. But in many other cases, actually, when you override, you want to say, actually, don't do any of the default behavior above me. I want to completely take it over. I think our strategy in Ember has been, in general, to try to keep framework logic outside of the same methods, outside of hooks, so that you don't have to call super inside of methods that Ember that are specially named that Ember's calling. And I would say, in general, if there are cases where that's still the case, where there's probably something not quite right.
Yeah, so one particular case is activate, where you need to call it without calling it, it doesn't work.
I think that was true about enter.
We came across a case where you needed it in activate. I may need to get back to that, but.
So actually the reason activate exists is because you have to call super in enter. And like I said, we don't want people to have to call super in hooks. So we created a new hook, which enter calls, called activate, which we do not use in the framework. So if in the framework we are doing something in activate, something bad is happening.
Do you also have enter overwritten?
No.
But it could be that you are having to call super because somewhere else in your application you have behavior in your superclass's activate method.
Yeah, this is a problem.
Or there could be a bug.
This is the problem, though. I mean, in every language that does have a normal super primitive, you just get used to calling it, because even if we provide a hook and then you use some mix-in and they need that hook, you do now have to call super. And most Ember object init is guaranteed to be empty, but there are things like Ember view that do stuff on init, and you need to call super. And languages, good luck with the auto calling super because there's generally
We're not going to do it. I'm just saying, I think everyone thinks it's possible in theory.
there's timing issues with sometimes you want to set up something before you call the parents thing.
I think the way it would work is that if you called super yourself, it would turn off. Anyway, no, I agree. I think in many languages though that have super, it is illegal to call super to something that does not exist, and therefore it is usually not the case that people simply call super because calling super means that there is a method in the super class that is called the same thing.
Specifically back to
So
this
I think
point.
it's just tricky. I think it's in OO, this is a tricky problem, and I wish I had a.
You have to read the code that you're overriding. Period. And every OO thing.
I think in Ember we try really hard.
Some languages even make you say override when you're overriding, just to remind you that you're overriding.
I think it's so that if the superclass adds the method later on, and you get an alert of some sort.
But that statement there is quite confusing because it's the framework. You don't want to have to dive into the framework's code to know when to.
I think Kris is saying something that he thinks is platonically correct, and I agree is probably platonically correct, in that the way OO works is that if you do not call super, you cannot be sure that the superclass is doing something, and therefore, at any time, if you just randomly implement a method, and nobody has told you that you don't have to call super, the only way to know is to check. The only way to check is to look at the source code. However, again, in Ember, in all cases where there is a thing that is a public hook, that we ever call a hook, it is important to us that if all that is happening is Ember is above you, that you do not have to call super. And we've implemented we've implemented evented systems so that, for example, if you have an Ember view and you want to listen for will re-render or something, instead of implementing a mixin that listens for that implements will re-render, forcing you to call super, you can say view.on will re-render. We've tried hard to solve this problem. Unfortunately, I think just in general, if you think about your Ruby experience, you will find that there are similar issues. Especially if you implement methods that are not the normal methods that people tend to implement, you will have to know, am I implementing a method that somebody above me has implemented, and do I need to call super? I think there's actually a lot of general research and discussion on what to do about this problem, but.
Yeah. And then there's also some times where the framework is doing something that is optional, and if you moved it into a hook, you would have no opt-out, and your opt-out is to not call super, and that's actually pretty typical of OO language. When you override, you're either extending what you're overriding or you're clobbering it, and your power over that is calling super.
Yeah, so this happened with setup controller in Ember, where we said, oh, it's bad if we have to call super, so we will make it a hook, and then we will just do the behavior that we think is the default outside of setup controller. And then people were like, I want to disable the default behavior, what do I do next? And there was no answer. The only answer was, we will stop doing that thing, we'll move it back into the super class, and we will tell you to not call super if you don't want the behavior. And I think I don't know, I can't think of a good general solution to this problem.
It's bad in the case, it's very bad when there is something you would want to override and it's doing something complex to where you'd have to re-implement, and that goes for outside of JavaScript and the language. You never want to say, oh, I could totally use this method if it weren't for this one line and this 40-line.
If you have a 40-line method, there's a different problem.
Yes, but I do think it is it's part of structure. We would like to avoid it. There are some hooks around destroying when you're tearing down things where you can't use the event system. And there are classes that do stuff on will destroy. The view has to do things, and on most of its hooks you're gonna have to call super. But in general, it is we attempt to avoid it.
Yeah.
Great. Let's,
Tom, did you have a?
No.
Awesome. We had a few questions around local storage, and is there anything special about using local storage with Ember?
So hold on. There's two things here. There's the notion of storing data on the user's computer, which I think is fabulous. And there's the local storage API, which is awful. So if people are really asking if we're going to do something with local storage, as in like window.local storage, the answer is
Question: local capital S storage in one word, or local space storage?
is this camel cased?
It was lowercase, but
Oh, yeah.
do you see Ember becoming more or less integrated with local storage, one word, in the future? Why or why not?
You should continue along this line of reasoning that you have started down. There's two branches, and you should. Follow.
Yeah. So a really popular thing today is caching. It's popular. In fact, Rails 4, well, first of all, computer science, they say there are two difficult problems: caching and naming things.
Cache and validation.
Cache and validation. Thankfully for us, Rails 4 has solved the cache and validation problem.
I'm just reporting what DHA said at the RailsConf this year.
It's a little Rails joke. That being said, I think caching is awesome. I think that part of the reason people write JavaScript applications is to deliver a great user experience. And part of delivering a great user experience is making your apps as fast as possible. Now, you all probably spend a lot of money on putting RAM in your servers so you can run Redis. You probably spend a lot of money on CDNs like Akamai. There's actually an even better cache than all of these things. It's called your user's RAM, your user's computer. There's nothing faster. Specifically with Ember data, we spend a lot of time extracting the semantics such that I think, and this is the difficult thing with Ember data, I think. If you think about Active Record, you can use it with Postgres, you can use it with MySQL, no problem. These are all relational databases. They speak various different dialects of SQL. However, if you were to go and say, I want to use Active Record with MongoDB, you would be laughed out of the room.
Well, they would tell you to use Mongoid.
You should use Mongoid instead of trying to beat Active Record, instead of trying to use relational semantics on top of a key value store, document store. And I think the challenge for us that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and I think we're going to get there, we're not there yet, is to have some kind of mapping such that you can take a record, you can take some kind of document that came from a relational store, and we should be able to transparently move that onto a key value store. And specifically what I'm referring to is IndexedDB. So IndexedDB, while imperfect, is significantly better than local storage, right? Local storage is a synchronous API. You're extremely limited in the amount of data you can save, but IndexedDB is really like getting a full-fledged database in the browsers, like having SQLite 3 or something like this. Personally, I feel like in a year's time, maybe 2 years, you will be laughed out of the room if I use your app in the airport. I'm in the lounge, I'm in the lobby, at the gate, I'm checking my app. If I close my laptop and I get on the plane and I can't navigate around your app and see the data that I had just been looking at, like it was literally in RAM like 3 seconds ago. Why can I not access it? Like it's driving me crazy.
Well, certainly for read-only cases.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Yeah. I think that we're gonna. So to me, that's what I'm most excited about Ember data, despite the trolls, is this seamless migration of I got a record in over the wire. It came in off my relational database. It came in off Mongo. Whatever. It was JSON. It came into my app. I want something that will transparently cache that. Something that will transparently take that data and treat IndexedDB as a write-through cache. And that way, if I'm using my app, I'm on the plane, wherever I am, I don't have internet access, even if it's read-only, things continue to work. So I think that's what I personally would like to see happen in the next few years.
I want to say a tiny thing about local storage with a capital S.
It's like online with a capital L.
In general, if you are using a browser API and that browser API responds synchronously, but that browser API is working with arbitrarily large or distant amounts of data, what that means is that your UI is going to block for arbitrarily large amounts of time. The browser vendors have made many mistakes over the years, well, a few mistakes like synchronous AJAX and local storage that are capable, depending on how the data is stored, of being extremely slow. And because of that, what has tended to happen, what happened with local storage is that they have reduced the amount of size that you're allowed to store in local storage to a tiny amount that they know that they can fit in RAM, and therefore they know that they can return it very fast synchronously. If they were allowed you to store a gigabyte of data in local storage, they would always have to go to the disk to get the data, and every single time they went to the disk, there would be a pause and your UI would block. So in general, if you're using an API in the browser and it appears to be synchronous, or it is synchronous and deals with arbitrary amounts of data, it is a bad API. It is doing something that could give your users a bad experience depending on their situation. And you should look for an equivalent API that is asynchronous.
I think most browsers severely limit it. I know on the phone we use Web SQL. It might be a dying standard, but there's okay, it was never standard. There is no IndexedDB, and there's local storage. Local storage is not usable. You get to it very quickly,
Get to its
and then it just starts throwing an error, and there's nothing to do.
Because it's synchronous.
It's Web SQL. You get, I think, by default 50 megs, and then it starts asking the user when you try and put something in it whether or not they want to grow. One of the big issues, though, with caching in general, and what Tom said, is phones have very limited amount of memory, and we're still behind on getting images to go in there. And I mean, we do a lot of crazy things on the phone to support offline, but in some areas of the app, like our gallery, it's just like we're not going to base 64 encode all of these images to stick them in a Web SQL.
You should ask Safari for the file system API. I'm just saying, Safari is basically IE6 on the mobile web. People should be very angry at Safari. And I'm telling you right now, if what happens is that people decide that all the features that are in every other browser are not really web features because they're not in Safari, I'm going to, I don't know, I can't do anything, but I will continue to speak ill of Safari. I fear very much that what's going to happen is the same thing happened in IE6, which is that people are going to say, oh, well, it's not in every browser, and by which they mean it's in every browser except for Safari, including Internet Explorer, and therefore it is not a web feature, and therefore Safari will be able to unilaterally block new features from being in the web platform. So please, I hope people in the room and people watching on video, please do not allow Safari to get away with this. This is not okay.
That being said, on the mobile site,
no, Safari is not actually better than that.
No, I agree with that, but what you're stuck with, though, too, is there's still a huge amount of people with the 2.2.
Old Android, yeah. So here's the difference between old Android browser and Safari. Old Android browser is not supported by Google. Google would like to make it go away, just like Microsoft would like to make IE6 go away. Apple actually does not want to get rid of Safari. In fact, they are continuing to ship it with very few new features, and they are the ones who are actively blocking completely new versions of browsers from having features. So do not allow them to get away with this by basically believing the fact that these are not features. These are not web features.
All right.
Sorry.
Let's pull it back to some nitty-gritty day-to-day Ember development. There were a few questions around debugging. And so what I'd like to do is go through the table, and if you've got one debugging tip to share, what would it be? Steph, we'll start with you. Leah, you've got
I do not have any debugging tips
Steph,
today.
we'll start with you and go across.
Is there a specific?
Any debugging tip that you find useful in your day-to-day Ember development that the folks here may benefit from?
I may got
Learn the debugger tools in the browsers that you're using. Learn them well, because there's a lot of little tricks you can learn that will save you huge amounts of time. As you learn them well, you start to see patterns in difficult to debug situations. Spend a little bit of time, just get used to these patterns, and they will save a massive amount of time later on. I actually kind of enjoy debugging, mostly, but I'm crazy, so that's why I sit and fix, I don't know, that's why I fix the cross-browser shenanigans.
Cool, so learn the debugger
Learn the debugger tools.
I mean, I completely agree with that. One, I'll just give a specific in that. So the timeline, and just one common thing that I've seen a lot in apps that's very clearly marked is, so when you record a timeline interacting with something that seems to be very slow or rendering very slow, the way the timeline works is every like event is a frame, and you want to be as quick as possible, and it highlights the slow ones. If you expand them out, one very common thing is you're doing stuff in code that is repeatedly invalidating the layout, and it clearly marks this. Not only that, when you click on it, it'll give you the line of code that is invalidating.
It'll typically be inside of a jQuery plugin.
So there's sometimes there's reasons for that. Sometimes programmatically, the most common thing is that forces the layout is you need to get the current height of something to do something magical. Did insert element is in Ember is not the place to do this because that is in the
middle.
In the middle of, you can. There are cases.
When should you do it, Kris?
So yeah, in a list of things, you would want to use this handy feature, the run loop, and schedule something after render, so that if two things in your click event were brought into the DOM, that you schedule something one time to do your waypoints or whatever with scrolling you want to do, where you force the layout. You do it once, but the aim is you should be careful not to have any of these within a frame, but if you do need it, that it happen once and as close to the rendering as possible, as close to the end of the frame as possible. But that tool is
All right, this is the interactive portion. This is it's two-parter sub-question. The first one has a sub-question. A, how many of you have used promises before in JavaScript? Can you please raise your hand? Show me where the promises are. Okay, many people using promises. Great. Deferred values. Awesome. Lovely. How many of you have used promises and have had exceptions swallowed by those promises, and you spent like 3 hours trying to figure out what was going wrong? Beautiful. I'm so sorry, you miserable bastards. Hold on, that's where I'm getting, homie. Part number 2. How many of you know about window.onError? How many of you have used window.onError? This is a handler you can install. You basically say window.onError. It's a function. Any exception that is not caught gets passed to this function. Great. Super handy. You can catch exceptions. You can send them to your server. Awesome. We have merged these two powerful concepts into one beautiful, amazing debugging device. New versions of RSVP.js, which is the promises library Yehuda and I wrote. We use it internally in Ember. There is now RSVP.onError. You can register a function on RSVP.onError, and any exception that is raised in a promise that is not caught or passed to an exception handler gets passed to your function. You can log it. You can do whatever you want. It has personally saved me a lot of time. Matthew Beal, there he is.
Does Ember.onError handle those as well?
No.
So we just added this feature. I'm sure we will integrate it in useful ways in Ember. Like we should by default. Yeah, so how many people know the difference between the black, purple, and blue stop sign? Okay, more people should raise that.
Give some more context, bro.
In the debugger, in the sources pane, there is a stop sign on the bottom. It has
Chrome.
two vertical lines.
In the Chrome developer tools.
Do people use things other than the Chrome developer tools? I feel like that piece
I think the
of context
Firefox guys use them too.
I think so too. So I'm excited to have people use Firefox developer tools, but not yet. Okay, there is in the scripts panel, there is a stop sign. When you open it for the first time, it will appear to be black. If If you click on it, it turns blue. If you click on it again, it turns purple. If you click on it again, it turns black. Okay, now that hopefully that's enough context. How many people know the difference between these states? Okay, still not enough people. Okay, great. So the difference is when you have the black stop sign, what that means is that all exceptions, as if they were in a promise, are going to get swallowed. This is not what you want. The blue stop sign means that all exceptions, if any exception happens anywhere in your application, including ones that got caught, it will pause the application so that you can look at the error. However, the blue stop sign also means that all the times that jQuery intentionally causes errors in order to figure out what environment it's in will pause your application. Probably this is not the stop sign that you were looking for. The purple stop sign is the Goldilocks stop sign. It only pauses the debugger on exceptions that make their way to the top and are unhandled. This means that all of jQuery's attempts to figure out its environment and trigger exceptions will not be caught, but if your application raises an exception, if you have a syntax error or something like this, it will pause and you are able to see on the right side the call stack and you can go figure out what's going on exactly with that error. So always, in my programming in JavaScript, I always leave on the purple stop sign, and I would recommend that that is also the state that you leave it in.
Good stuff. All right, so we've got about 9 minutes left, and what I'd like to do is go out to you guys. We're going to try to keep the questions and the answers quick. Address your question to one of the panelists, and we'll try to move through 3 or 4 of them in the last 9 minutes, and then we'll go out for drinks. Who's got a question?
I like the Goldilocks reference.
Okay, everyone wants a drink. I actually have...
There's some questions right there.
I have one more debugging tip. You should watch Paul Irish's Chrome Developer Tool videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do a question?
Yeah. Do you guys prefer, like, is the hope, I guess in developing Ember, like, is the hope that more development will move client side, or is your hope that more development will move client side? Like, is that, do you see that as preferable, or do you still favor server side?
What is that question?
So we get trolled a lot on Twitter. In fact, there's no better way to make me have like an aneurysm than to tweet at me and say things like, "Oh my God, Ember.js.com doesn't use Ember. Clearly, these jokers can't even use their own framework." I will literally come through the internet and punch you.
It's true.
I believe that there's a tool for every job. I totally believe that. However, I would like to see more web applications. Can I pick on Harvest for a second?
Go for it.
All right, Harvest is a fantastic tool. You should all sign up using coupon code POMSTER. Save $10 in your first month. However, one thing that drives me crazy is I'm in weak view and I'm entering in a bunch of data. Cool, it's in, save, looks like it's good. I try to switch to another page, but of course writing big backbone apps is hard, so each page is a separate backbone app, right? And it's like, hey, you didn't save the week. Do you sure you want to change apps? That's ridiculous. Why does that even happen? I don't know. Why does that even happen? Anyway.
Ember wasn't very good a year ago.
Oh shit. Touche. So yes, I would prefer that more web applications move to a client-side app. I think the fact that you are using an app, like a user-facing app, and the fact that your user interface is being rendered possibly thousands of miles away is like the definition of a hack. And I would absolutely love to see web applications move more towards the model of how it's always run.
There is one thing I would like to add on this topic. Many people hear this and they say, that is terrible, you are losing URLs. URLs are important, how could you agree to lose URLs? I agree that that would in fact be terrible and is in fact the state of many people who write JavaScript applications. However, in Ember we have worked extremely hard so that if you build if you use the normal tools of building Ember applications, you will not have bad URLs. Therefore, I think people should advocate. One of the things that made me very happy is that when Discourse came out, there were several people who normally go around trolling JavaScript applications, complaining about URLs, and they did not simply disappear in this case. Several of them appeared in the Hacker News comments and said, I was ready to come troll you and yell at you about your URLs, but I begrudgingly have to admit, your URLs are actually quite good. I would like Ember applications to, in general, have this thing, and I think in general this will be a thing that you you get sort of for free by using Ember. Discourse went above and beyond with things like as you use infinite scroll, it changes the URL. They don't use push state like some other applications do. As you move down, you can hit the back button and go back from whence you came. But I think in general, a lot of people don't want JavaScript applications because many JavaScript applications are broken in terms of the back button, in terms of URLs, in terms of sharing, bookmarking, right-clicking and saying open new tab. Please, if you build an Ember application, care about this. Do not have, I do not want to ever hear anybody saying, I'm building an Ember application, but I don't think URLs are that important. Please have URLs, they're important.
Good stuff. One or two last questions. Tim.
Hi, on the topic of URLs, so is there any potential for that state chart that got removed? I want stateless routes.
Yes, we're going to have that. Yes.
Awesome, thanks.
Good question.
I think you mean routeless states, but
well,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
you mean states without URLs. Yeah.
yes, I want back the state chart.
Yeah, seems good. But I would say one thing, which is a lot of people who write, a lot of people think that they don't want URLs when a URL would be totally appropriate. So don't, if you think that if you can't think of any good reason not to have a URL, just have a URL, it's fine. URLs, they will make your life better, they will make your users, it will make it easier for users to share, they will be able to send their mom a link to something that's good.
All right. Any last questions to round us out tonight?
Do you have any thoughts on how we can take control of animating outlets? We were having issues on a project recently where you're using modals and trying to transition between outlets with animation, and you couldn't hook to will destroy it anyway.
Yeah. So I think this is a general animation question. How do I animate things in Ember? So there's a really cool plugin called Ember Animated Outlet, which I would look into and maybe is awesome. I personally have not used it. However, I have not heard people complaining a lot about it, but I have heard many people saying that they use it. So my guess is that it probably mostly works.
Ringing endorsement.
I'm only holding back my ringing endorsement because I think this is incredibly important for Ember to have. I would like, I think Angular beat us to the punch on this, and that is unfortunate. However, a thing that Angular did, maybe we will have to do this, but I hope not, is that every single directive in Angular that wants to support animations has to manually handle animations. I am not ready to throw in the towel on that yet. I would like to make it so that, in general, people who want to use animations can use the tools that we have already given you and get animations as part of those tools, and not make it so that all the code that already is written has to go in and add explicit support for animation. So it's for sure like a 1.1 or 1.2 feature where it's a high priority for us. But I want to take the time to do it right, as with everything else that we try to do in Ember. It's like, in general, we try not to rush out features that we think we can do better, and that's where we are now.
For right now, is there any way I can look into after outlet reviews been destroyed?
So I think you should look at the implementation of Ember Animated Outlet. I know that, was it Paul or Gordon? Somebody added a bunch.
It was Paul. There's some tricky cases in where he decided to. There's some trickiness with it, and I don't actually want to deep dive into the details
like
of it.
1 minute, but I believe that Paul added a bunch. I know that Paul added a bunch of hooks into container view with the express intent of having a short-term, somewhat verbose but plausible solution for animations. And I believe that it is true that Ember Animated Outlet uses those hooks. And I believe that other animation solutions that I have seen in like Stack Overflow and other places also use these hooks. And those hooks are public, and I think are going to be either via third-party library or yourself going to be the way that you manage it. So there's hooks that basically give you access to the lifecycle of a container view, which is and you can use it.
And so just to clarify, Animated Outlet adds those hooks back in. We reverted the hooks from container view because they caused other problems. Because
if that is the case, then Animated Outlet must have backported the hooks into itself.
yes, that's what I'm saying. But it uses it in a very narrow scope, whereas container view is used as the backing of collection view,
And therefore,
and it
probably-
wasn't
I'm surprised to hear that.
wasn't run loop aware, didn't wait for things to settle down, so the hooks it just.
So I am wrong. I
gave
remember
Chris many
working
headaches.
this feature, but it's not in master. However, it seems like some of the third-party solutions have basically adopted these same hacks. So,
Container view will support this. It will be added, but it's going to be done in a way that's
let me pop back up.
more generic.
Let me pop back up. Yes, we want animations. There are some third-party solutions that exist today that you should look at, the implementation of which might be helpful to you. We would like to do a good version of this that does not require every single view being aware of animations. We are working on that, and hopefully in the 1.1 or 1.2 release we'll have animation support.
For 1.0?
No, in 1.1 or 1.2.
Cool. Awesome. I want to take the time to say thank you to Leah, Steph, Kris, Tom, Yehuda. Thanks for being here and for sharing your time with us. And thank you all for participating and for being part of the Ember community. It's been amazing to see this thing grow over the last 2 years, and it's going to be another wild ride over the next the years to come. So I'm looking forward to doing it together with everybody here in New York. We can start right now by going out for drinks at Rogue, which is on 6th Avenue between 25th and 26th. It's 757 6th Avenue. Casual, you're not obligated, but you're certainly welcome. And one more thank you to Harvest for hosting us.
Yeah! Coupon code Tomster. $10 off your first month.
And so with that, I want to thank everybody and have a great night.
Yeah. Yeah, look!